Hey folks, I want to tell you about an experience that took place in mid-1997 involving a race of beings that I now call the Teal'hia. At least that's what they said they called themselves. At the time that they occurred, at the time that this experience occurred, they appeared in a very different form, and I've written about that on my blog Otherworldly Encounters before. They appeared as a kind of light field, if you like. I've described it as like a sort of the appearance of a fluxing kind of light, like a cuttlefish, and it was very unusual. And we had about a week, the better part of a week, of experiences at that time. Myself and my then partner. Our son hadn't been born at that point, and we'd had a lot of unusual things happen. We'd had lots of other encounters and lights in the house and outside and all that kind of thing. But during this encounter they came and did different things on successive nights. On one of the nights they appeared to come and repair some scar tissue damage that I had in my lungs from heavy smoking when I was younger. But on this one night they came and they explained something very unusual. And this didn't happen to me, this happened to my partner then. And she woke me up immediately afterwards and explained it to me. When they came at that time, for the course of that week, I was awake during one of the nights, and another night, how to explain this? I saw them outside on the veranda, but I didn't interact with them. And there were some nights when they didn't appear to come and interact with us, but they were doing other things. On this one night they came and they spoke to her about an issue. I'm not sure why they raised this particular issue, but it was in the context of a much bigger conversation. At the time, if I've got this correct, yeah, that's right. At the time, her mum had previously lived in the house, and she had taken, my then partner had taken care of her mum, and her mum went into a nursing home, and she had a lot of guilt about that and a lot of discomfort, and we'd spent a lot of time in the nursing home, and it was just a horrible place, as many people know that nursing homes are just dreadful places to end your life in. Everything that took place around this conversation was in that context. And what the Teal'hia explained, there were 5 of them in the room, and they had done other things, shown other things as well, but to demonstrate what they were saying, they showed a projection. And as I've talked about before with Teal'hia projections, it's not like when we would create a projection or a hologram. It's actually real. It looks like real object, except that you're seeing things on a different scale. You might see a whole place or a whole range of events, but it will take place on the size of your room, or this big, or something like that. This took place on a medium scale, let's say, so there was a projection going with all of this. And the issue that they showed her was about the population in Australia, but I believe that this issue was relevant to every other country in the world, especially developed or so-called first world nations. What they explained to her was that there will come a time in our future, and they did actually give a date, and I'm not going to give you that date, but there will come a time in our future when families will be given an option to take a payment, a significant payment, to have their older relatives, I'm assuming parents there, euthanized. And of course that decision is put to those older people who are able to make that decision, but there may be others who are unable to make that decision, and their children have guardianship and they can make that decision. It was explained that people will be given the option to have their parents euthanized, and they will be given a significant payment. And what that will do is significantly reduce the older population that is in nursing homes and requiring some kind of aged care, be it community-based or acute in a hospital or some other variation of that. And we talked a lot about this over the successive years, and that whole discussion, I was 4 or 5 years out of my training in biology and microbiology, and I'd been aware of growth curves and things like that. You know, I'd grown organisms and cultured them and studied their doubling rate and growth curves and all of that kind of thing. So I was very conscious of population issues. I was very interested in that subject. She did actually tell them to discuss the issue with me, but I'm not aware that that took place. She was frustrated at having been given so much information that was too much to deal with. They then also talked about a lot of cellular biology to do with cancer and things like that. She tried to point them in my direction, but I'm not sure what happened, but I'm not aware that those conversations took place. So she seemed to be the one who was given all of this information. When we talked about it, we came to a couple of conclusions. One was that we're on a collision course with our population, and in developing nations there appears to be a trend of the aging or the greying population. And if you were to draw a bell curve, look up bell curve on Wiki, and I'm sure you can figure it out from that. Most people will know what a bell curve is anyway. If you draw a bell curve, in general, this is just very general, you would say that in developed nations the bell curve skews to the right. So there seems to be this pattern instead of this pattern. So the bell curve seems to skew to the right, and that means that you've got a more aged population and fewer young people. And one of the difficulties with that is you then have fewer people in the workforce. You have a lot more pressure on people to stay in work, and that could mean, in terms of policy changes, that governments are forced to then up the age of retirement so that people stay at work for much longer, and also people with disabilities, people who otherwise would have been supported on social security, are then forced into work so that you have more of a workforce at that lower end. And the other thing in terms of policy is that governments do things like our government has done and offer things like a baby bonus for young people to have babies. So the real key issue seems to be that in developed nations, just come a bit closer because I'm not sure if that wind, I don't have my muff for the mic, I'm not sure if that wind is going to stop this. What seems to be happening is you have lower conception rates for younger people in developed nations, and you have this booming aging population. People are living longer thanks to antibiotics and all kinds of things. So in the end, that creates an awful lot of pressure on governments to try and create a viable system where they can support the population in terms of social security, in terms of economic productivity, in terms of actual resources, and it puts a huge amount of pressure on governments to provide for the aging population. You know, it becomes this huge whack, not just in the economy, but in terms of demand on the environment, the whole consumption chain. And you could see a time, if you created that projection into the future without any changes, where most of the work we do would be related to the support of older people. Now, I have nothing against older people. I'm in my mid-40s myself. I'm going to be old hopefully one day, and I'm looking forward to it. But there's a problem. How are we going to sustain this? Now, in developing nations, so-called third world nations, we have the opposite problem. We seem to have huge numbers of younger people. We have a younger population, and that bell curve appears to skew to the left, a few people making it into older age. But as these nations become more and more developed, I believe that we're going to see that curve will slowly shift from this end and move along and become more skewed to the right. So it will be much the same as developed nations. And I think that will be a typical trend for developed nations, that curve will shift to the right. Now, if you look at the exact population demographics, it doesn't fit that curve exactly. In some nations it probably does, doesn't fit exactly. Some people talk about the coffin curve and things like that, but essentially it follows that trajectory. That says to me that every single developed nation on earth is in trouble. It says to me that unless decisions are made, we're going to face a major crunch. And it's obvious to people that our planet can no longer sustain the demand for resources that we're putting on it. And some people have this strange idea that economies can just keep growing forever and they're independent of the environment, which is absolutely absurd, because we live on a planet and the economy grows in the context of being part of a planet. At some point we're going to have to say we have a population problem, and we're going to have to reduce the overall population, because I do think the impact on our environment is unsustainable. And I know there are people who are saying that the population problem we have is a myth. And I think there are a lot of myths, like the myth of man-made climate change, but I don't think that's a myth. I think there is a problem. I mean, I've driven a lot in the jobs that I've had, hundreds of kilometres sometimes in one day, and across the landscape I see huge changes, and have seen huge changes over 20 years that absolutely terrify me. Here in Australia, where we're reasonably developed and we have lots of rules and regulations about what you can and can't do, the development has been over the top, let alone in a developing nation where there's serious competition for resources and people are desperate to survive. I think a couple of things are happening policy-wise that lead me to believe that this issue is on the cards. As I said, I don't believe in the idea of man-made climate change. I think that all climate is created by the sun and the relationship between planets, and we're just seeing the changes we're seeing now are just part of a much larger cycle. And I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the so-called consensus isn't a consensus if you research that. Anyway, coming back, it seems to me that many governments in developed nations are introducing the idea of a carbon tax. And I have this dreadful suspicion that one day the carbon tax is going to start being put aside, or part of it will be put aside to support this idea of being able to have a pool of funds that is given to people to euthanize oldies. And I think if you think about it this way, let's say a person develops dementia and they survive from, I don't know what the average lifespan for somebody with dementia is, but let's say they survive from 70 to 85. That's 15 years of looking after a person with dementia, and they may be in a nursing home. If you were to add up the cost of that, it's big. If you were to take a small portion of that, let's say you took let's say it cost $40,000 a year to sustain a person with dementia. Let's say over 15 years, what's that? $400,000, $600,000. I hope I got those figures right. Correct me if I got that wrong. Let's say you take a small portion of that and you make a $100,000 or $150,000 payment. That's enough to set somebody up to get into a home and to make a big difference to their life. If it's a bigger payment, it might be enough to set them up for life. Whereas constantly forking that money out for people who have very poor quality of life seems really absurd to me. That's just one example. There are lots of examples, and we can look at much longer periods. It could be that by the time this comes, people will be living till 90 on average, and we'll have many more centenarians. So it could be that to support somebody 30 years of being older is going to cost an awful lot. Whereas those people might, their quality of life might have deteriorated significantly at that early phase, and maybe it's better to say, I'm satisfied with my life. Now, I don't have an opinion on this matter, and I'll say categorically that the Teal'hia, we also used to call them the Brownies, they didn't have an opinion on it. They didn't make any judgment. They just said, this is what is going to happen in your country, and this will follow in many other countries. And I'm not sure if Australia is like a benchmark, or we're just one of the countries that follow suit with this. But it seems to me that the big countries, England, Canada, America, Australia, probably the G7 countries, that they will follow this model. In the years that followed, I spent a lot of time looking for evidence of this, and I couldn't find anything. A couple of years ago I started looking again, and I did find one article about plans to off the baby boomers. I don't know whether that was based on policy or speculation, and I once called up a radio show and mentioned this idea, and wrote me off that I said that I didn't say aliens said it. I said I saw this on the horizon, but I haven't per se heard about this, and I haven't looked it up. Maybe there's more talk about this now. So they didn't have an opinion, and I don't really have an opinion. I mean, I value all life. All life is sacred to me. But we make decisions about everything. We make decisions about, sometimes we make decisions about when to bring children in the world. We make decisions about our health. We make decisions about when to have operations. We make decisions about work. We make decisions about, sometimes, about who we fall in love with and who we marry and all these kind of things. We make decisions about so many things. Maybe the right to die is just another decision we ought to be entitled to. I don't have an opinion, although I feel that life is sacred. But one day our society needs to have this debate and make some real decisions. Now, I know euthanasia and the debate around it has been around for a long time, and there seems to be no resolution. In fact, people get very upset about it, and that may well have happened as a result of this video. There may be some comments, people reacting to it. It's a touchy thing. People don't want to hear it. But at the end of the day, we have a couple of issues to deal with. We have huge burden on resources. We have governments who are going to be under pressure to provide, and we're going to find ourselves in a position of having to work longer to sustain our lifestyle. I mean, who the hell wants to work to 90, 80, or to the end of your life without being able to retire? And unfortunately, the pressure is there, and some of these things are already happening, like extended retirement ages. I don't think it's going to be easy for us to get there. Everything that I'm seeing tells me that we are on this trajectory, and this is coming. So that's what they showed us, that governments will pay for people to euthanize older people, and for older people to be euthanized themselves if they should make that decision, and payments to go to whomever they wish, or those with guardianship will receive payments. And somehow the payments that they make, there must be a pool that's created, but somehow the payments they make will create a long-term saving, so that economies are better able to function, governments are better able to budget for economic growth. At the time I heard this, I thought that's pretty wild, but the older I get, the more I think this is coming. So stay tuned, pay attention to what your government is doing, and whether you feel this is wrong or right, you have a voice and an opinion and a say on this. For me, the best thing to do is to get educated. Why might governments be forced to make decisions like this? We can't just point the finger and say, you bad government, you can't do this. We're all part of this, and at the end of the day, if it is true that governments won't be able to make their budgets, you look at America, for example. America, despite all the blame on Obama and every president that's ever been in, the fundamental problem with America at the moment is its budget and the allocation of its budget to defence, and in addition to that, the amount of money being spent on health and aged care. Medicare is crippling the American budget and will basically, as far as I can see, bankrupt the American government within a short time. I think we're on the verge of that now. So these are very real issues, and I don't see easy solutions to this whole problem. The only other answer I see to this issue is, and this may relate to my previous video, whether it unfolds or not, what I said I was shown, is that we have a major solar event that leads to the death of millions, and after that with a lot less people on the planet, still a lot of people, but a lot less, governments start taking the issue of population and birth control much more seriously, and we as citizens engage more actively in that debate rather than saying it's all bad. I mean, China's had a one-child policy for a long time, and although that has created a whole bunch of social problems that also need to be dealt with and discussed, had China not have done that, God knows how many people it would have now, 3 billion people maybe. China has basically saved the world from a huge burden, although it has its own problems. So these are real issues, and as I say, maybe there are two choices. Maybe nature will do this for us and we'll have a major catastrophe that will wipe out millions, and then governments and people will be forced to make decisions about how many people are allowed on the planet, and how many children are we entitled to have. The flip side, or maybe both will happen, is that governments make a decision to pop off oldies and reward families for it. So tell me what you think. I'm really curious to know how other people feel about this. I've lived with this for 15 years, and there are times when it's been very uncomfortable, and other times when I thought it needs to happen. I'm really quite undecided, and I just pay attention, and I'm interested in seeing how people in governments react to this. Let me know what you think. Take care.